dropped by proper 12. That business is only alive because of that person's image.
Recently there was Conor McGregor, of course, that's Tiger Woods in the past. You always wonder how much the brand's new before it comes. Anything that's built very quickly tends to be something that can be destroyed very quickly.
That's a lot for someone who's 20 years old.
I took a relatively low-level role as a matter of survival. I was ultimately made redundant in the financial crisis in 2006. There's been times where there's not really been as much money coming in.
They increased the business rate to a point where we couldn't even afford to keep up. We essentially lost everything. The recession really hit everyone hard, and we're still feeling that effect today.
What you should really be looking at is what is the problem you want to solve.
What was the biggest risk?
So you have very small businesses that are competing against monolithic, huge international organizations. Jeff Bezos, he's always said that the one thing that sets Amazon apart is that.
Hello and welcome to the Startup Series, a podcast for all up-and-coming business owners, anybody who's hoping to get involved in business, and if you just want to find out any local trades or any local tricks for anybody who wants to get involved in the world of business. I'm Charlie Mulholland, and joining me today is
Hugh Storer.
And can you tell me a bit about yourself, Hugh?
Sure. So I'm in my late 30s. I originally studied law at the LSE. I didn't want to go into law initially, so I went into economic development consultancy, which is a branch of economics where you essentially look to help developing countries to become richer. A lot of it is, in fact, focused around infrastructure and small business. I was ultimately made redundant in the financial crisis in 2006. After that, I did, in fact, start working for a law firm, worked my way up, and now I operate a couple of different small businesses. One is an estate planning company. It's not actually that small. I think we have about 100,000 clients now. But in the past couple of years, I've also started up a sales and marketing business. And most recently, I've started up a small software company.
So you talked about the redundancy in 2006, and that obviously pushed you into going further into the world of law. And obviously you said you weren't particularly keen on that area. What would then incite you to go from going back to law to thinking, I'm going to go start up on my own for my own business?
Well, it's a good question. I suppose there's a lot of parallels with what's happened in the past few years and COVID in the UK, but the 2006 recession was quite a hard one. It was difficult to find work. So as a matter of necessity, I took a relatively low-level role as a matter of survival. But in fact, then instead of going on and qualifying as a lawyer, which would be the most obvious route even at that stage, I instead have focused almost entirely, exclusively on the business side, building that business and now starting a few other businesses.
So you obviously said you wanted to get into that estate planning company, and what sort of steps did you need to go into a sector that you weren't particularly focused on?
I mean, you definitely need to be open-minded, have a good work ethic, definitely be willing to, an ability to adapt to change, learn new things. My focus from the start and what I've always enjoyed was the business side rather than the technical side. And that's just, led to me then starting other businesses, getting into investing and things like that.
So what, out of all the three businesses that you've said that you've got into so far, what was the trickiest one for you to get into out of all of them?
I think the sales and marketing one has been most difficult because the estate planning business was already established, or at least fairly established, when I ended up going into that business. It was a small business, but it was somewhat established with some operational base. But the sales and marketing business, I've started completely from scratch and without any degree in marketing or sales, without any real training on those areas, just the things that I picked up from experience running another business. It's definitely been the most challenging, and I'm about 2.5 years in with that business now.
See, when I've spoken to business owners in the past that say that they've gone into a sector that they don't particularly know, and they obviously reach out to those who have been involved in said sector, and that helps them gain some form of knowledge. Did you have anyone to fall on in that sense, or did you just pick it all up on your own independently?
No, there have been people, and I'd say mentors. You could say, I won't name anybody on this podcast, just for the sake of confidentiality. But there's another businessman who's older. He's around 60 years old. I've learned an incredibly large amount from him in developing the business. And also I've worked quite closely with one of the contestants from The Apprentice who runs her own business, which is very successful. And I've collaborated with her on some of those bigger projects, and I've done some things myself as well.
I was going to say, I would like to find out who that Apprentice star is, but obviously don't want to name any names. Now, moving on to my first port of call for this interview. I'm obviously here to talk about all the trends that are going on in the world of business. If anyone wants to know my background in business, I've done about 12 years worth of business. My family were independent traders ever since I was about 12 years old. I've worked my way through from sole businesses. Like my dad and my mum had several businesses across Blackpool. Unfortunately, they have now had to disband those businesses. Unfortunately, my mother passed away a few years ago, and my dad decided to come out of sole trading. But I learned a lot from him about the business sector, what it takes to run a successful small business. So I'm obviously here to talk about what I know about the business sector. And today I'm here to talk about celebrity collaborations when it comes to businesses. Now, the first point of call is now a lot of celebrities are stamping their names onto these sorts of brands. Like, for example, in recent years, you've had KSI and Logan Paul with their Prime logo. About 10, 15 years ago, you had Vitamin Water, however you want to pronounce it, with 50 Cent. And I think he went on to sell that business for about $50-60 million. I don't know how much he ended up making on that. There are lots of these influencers that just want to create something. And again, another point of example, Mr. Beast with his Feastables, that has become a bit of a trendsetter. What's your thoughts on these public figures now deciding that they want to stamp their name on a product that didn't exist previously and want to take on bigger sectors for a space in their market?
I mean, I can certainly see the attraction of it, because if you have that kind of personal brand and following, you can leverage that to grow a business very quickly. It doesn't even necessarily need to be a business that you have knowledge in. I'd assume, or at least hope, most of them have some passion for the projects that they're working on, and it's not purely about the money. I'm sure that's not always the case. Certainly, you can see that the ones that have done best in the long term have had a bit more than just a name stamped on them. You know, they have a bit more substance to it and a bit more involvement in the business itself.
Well, do you not think that some of these like new brands that have come out, like the way that they're basically marketed is off the basis of this person's name? And as long as this person like stays credible within the limelight, that business is only alive because of that person's image.
Yeah, that is, I think, the biggest drawback. So, of course, the personality and the following lets them build the business very quickly. As I say, they can leverage their personal brand to build a business brand. But at the same time, if they make slip-ups publicly in terms of their personal brand, it will then very heavily impact their business brand, which obviously we've seen quite a few times. Recently, there was Conor McGregor, of course. That's been the biggest one recently. There's been Tiger Woods in the past, but it's happened many times, hasn't it, really?
Yeah, of course. I mean, for like with Conor, that whole case that has come out recently, he's been dropped by Proper 12. Like, he'd sold that area of the business already, and he ended up staying on as just an ambassador to promote the whiskey. And now I think Tesco and Asda have said that they've dropped, I think it's Tesco and Asda anyway, they've said that they've dropped Proper 12 from its shelves. And then he had the Forge Irish Stout, which is supposed to be his version of Guinness. And I think he also sold his share and again was an ambassador for that. And then I think they've dropped it now. And certain pubs across the UK have like blacked out their Forge Stout barrels and their pints. And I think I saw one pub recently, I think they sold everything at a very cheap rate, and all the money that they made, they donated to charity because they didn't want to give anything towards the company. Like, that's a lot of bad PR for a company that was based solely off just one guy.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing as well, because you have some set up their own products and their own businesses, or perhaps do it in a collaboration. But the other side of that is big businesses like Nike and so on and so forth. They often rely on these personalities as part of their branding and sponsorship. And you see whenever one of these sorts of cataclysmic, reputational damaging events happen, those celebrities get dropped very, very quickly. You always wonder how much the brands knew before it comes out in some of these cases. Definitely, I would say with these personality-driven brands, you can grow them very, very quickly. But just in general, in business, but I suppose in life, actually, as a general rule, anything that's built very quickly tends to be something that can be destroyed very quickly.
Agreed. Like, the ones that have been successful, you look at the likes of Air Jordan. I think that's become even bigger than Nike itself in some senses, like to the point where it started off as a Nike product, but now it's just become Jordan as just an actual thing. And in recent months, during the last Euros, it was announced that Adidas were doing the same thing with Jude Bellingham. Like, the Bellingham the Bellingham brand is going to be its own thing. I think it's JB10 or whatever, like, Jude's going to come out with in recent times. Or it might just be JB. Like, that's a lot for someone who's 20 years old and now going into, like, the superstardom of Real Madrid and all that. If his image crumbles at all, that's essentially that whole project from Adidas destroyed, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a big risk. But you can see and understand why it's so attractive to those personalities and celebrities. It's a lot of income and you know, it's certainly, if it's something that they actually believe in as well. I mean, it's obviously it's a good thing to raise awareness as well, beyond just the business sort of side of things. If
you were to start up your own business, like, based on your reputation, like, what would you think would be the best thing to invest in?
That is a very good question. Most of my businesses at the moment, they are the opposite of these celebrity-driven ones. So they are more based on underlying metrics, good service level, client focus. I mean, I would say, if anything, my sales and marketing business probably is the one that's you know, closest to my personality, which is more about assisting other businesses with their sales and marketing.
Hey business owners, are you ready to level up? My startup offers hundreds of deals on the tools and services you need to grow. Don't wait. Unlock savings and start boosting your business today.
When you started up your first business, what was the first things you looked into before you thought, okay, I'm going to give this a proper go?
I think the first thing you should always look at when starting a business isn't the money to be generated, as it were, or just a pure focus on profit is actually very bad from a business perspective long term as well. What you should really be looking at is, what is the problem you want to solve? So you should always have a very client heavy focus, I think. So you should be looking at, who are your potential clients? What is their problem? And how can I solve this problem better than others in the market, whether that means for a lower cost, which is obviously attractive, or a higher service level, so a better solution than anybody else. And I'd always start there and then work back from there. And if you look at the real business leaders, and I'm not talking about small business now, but very, very large business, so say Amazon, if you look at how Jeff Bezos, for instance, speaks about Amazon and his business, he's always said that the one thing that sets Amazon apart from all of their competitors to become, you know, the largest business in the world is that they have a kind of unstoppable focus on the client. So whenever you use Amazon software or buy anything from Amazon, or interestingly, they power most of the web as well, which a lot of people don't know, but the underlying web services that everybody uses, their focus 100% is the client, which is why Amazon delivers faster than everybody else. Their software is so easy to use, relatively speaking. And because he started with and went on with that perspective, it's obviously helped lead to it become such a large, successful business today.
So obviously client base is essentially what you're saying is what is needed to drive a successful business. If you lose like any sort of credibility in the early stages of a business, that's really going to affect you in the long term, no?
Yeah, that would be incredibly difficult. So authenticity is very important. Good service levels are very important. You definitely don't want anything that sort of is actually damaging to your reputation as well. I suppose there's a division, isn't there, really, between just doing something that is focused around making money, which might be, some of these crypto coins and things. That goes back a little bit to like the personality, celebrity status, but that's much more of a cash grab. But to build something that is long-term sustainable, you want to be focused on the client and then build your processes around it. And a lot of those things you can outsource. So you should really, I suppose, just be focusing on what you do best, and then try to use others' expertise where you can to help with those aspects of the business, because nobody can do everything, which I think is a trap that small business owners tend to fall into.
So when you first got into it, what was the biggest risk you took when you first decided to get involved in your business?
I mean, for me personally, it was the capital risk, because for what I wanted to do, I did need to put down, at least for me, from my perspective, and everybody's different on this with how much wealth they have and how much money they can put down. But I had to put down, relatively speaking, quite a significant amount of capital. The fact that I did that shows that I believed in the business and the model. But of course, it's quite stressful when you're starting to spend your own money, but it's not on things that you want, like a car or what have you, but it's on a business that you're hoping to grow. But there is always that risk that things could go wrong for whatever reason. The second thing is just time, isn't it? So I was running one business when I started the second business. So ultimately then I was working evenings, weekends. It's very difficult to balance those things, but it's just part of, I suppose, the sacrifice that's needed sometimes to set up something that's successful.
Was there ever a time where you genuinely thought, I can't do this, this is getting a bit too much, or maybe this has just become a bit over my head?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest with you, there definitely have been those times. There's been times where there's not really been as much money coming in as has been needed to, cover the expenses. Times where obviously therefore I've had to dip deeper into my own finances to keep things going. But I've always believed that ultimately it would be successful in the end. So although I've had doubts, which is only human, I've always believed, that it would be possible. Just have to have some perseverance and keep going.
And what sort of ideas have you got for the future then? Are you happy with what you've got at the minute, or do you think, okay, this is going to be my next idea?
I am happy with what I have, and I wouldn't be disappointed to operate what I have and just continue. But I think once you start the journey of trying to start new things, it actually becomes, in a way, kind of a little bit addictive. There's, other people coming to me with various different projects and things. The one that I'm looking at most closely at the moment is this software business, which ties in with my sales and marketing business. But that's what I think I'm going to do next. And it's to try to build something for smaller businesses that provides a kind of CRM and sales platform for them.
So I want to get into something that's a little bit near and dear to my heart, and that is the high street. Now, as somebody who grew up on the high street, I've seen it absolutely busting and several shops open, people spending money like no tomorrow, whether it was on the promenade in Blackpool, whether it's in the centre of town. I grew up where the high street was the place to be. If you wanted to get at this time of year, get your Christmas shopping in, make sure that you had enough presents in for your family, maybe even plan ahead for the rest of the year. The high street was, to us, like a haven for business owners, because you could just set yourself up in a good popular area and get going. But then now with the rise of delivery companies like Amazon, it's really brought the high street to its knees, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, I'm older than you, obviously, so have very similar experience at the high street. It was always hustle and bustle. It's the centre of the town. I mean, these days, I know it varies from town to town, but it does seem that the high street sort of devolving into essentially just coffee shops and ice cream shops rather than any other type of business or shop that's selling things. I mean, I think inevitably with the rise of the internet, the high street was always going to change and suffer. But I would say that successive government policies and choices have made things much worse. I mean, just to give some examples, business rates have not really changed or adapted, yet online businesses don't pay business rates, or if they do, they're a very different type of business rate. Of course, businesses on the high street have to pay their tax. But when you look at some of the competition, especially the large competition, of which I'm talking about the multinationals, they're not breaking the law, you know, Google and Amazon, they're not breaking any laws, but that is a policy choice as to what the law is. But they're not paying their fair share of tax in the same way. So you have very small businesses, family businesses, businesses that people really care about and might have been passed down from generation to generation that are competing against, you know, kind of monolithic, huge international organizations that aren't even paying their fair share of tax. It's not even really a fair competition.
See, when you were talking about business rates, that's something that has affected my family. So one of the shops we had in the town centre, we had to close down after 12 months because they increased the business rate to a point where we couldn't even afford to keep up. And we essentially lost everything in that business. It was one of the hardest struggles that my family had. Like, we had a lot of capital and a lot of investment into that shop. And because of business rates constantly increasing, and mind you, this must have been 2010, 2011, like during either the last year of the Gordon Brown Labour government or the first year of David Cameron's. I can't remember which, but this was at a point where the recession really hit everyone hard, and we're still feeling that effect today.
Yeah, and it's only getting worse, to be honest. I mean, it's getting harder and harder for physical shop type businesses to operate and to make a profit, but councils, for whatever reason, I suppose they of course they have a lot of services to provide, but they're always pushing for higher and higher business rates. I don't personally see the sense in it, because all that happens when the business rates get pushed up too high is businesses like your family's business shut down. And what moves in, which we also see, I'm sure it'll be all across the country, but certainly locally here, is a lot of charity shops opening. The reason for that is because they are exempt or sometimes partially exempt from business rates. So the council is not getting any more, you know, extra revenue from those shops.
No, so that's the thing. Like, when I walk through, like, for example, a prominent area up north is Lytham St Anne's. I take my dad up there quite a fair bit. We walk through the high street now, and I'd say 1 in every 3 shops that I've seen is a charity shop, or maybe half are charity shops. And like you said, they're not paying any sort of revenue. They're just that, and they can charge what they want, because again, it's in a prominent area. Like, some of these places are charging like £300 for a jacket or something like that they've collected off someone else. But then at the same time, it's like, well, we're not, like, they're not getting anything towards that. The charity's making something off it, and obviously give money to charity, but at the same time, as an actual business model, it's succeeding far better than if I was to open up my own fashion brand in the middle of a town centre. I've got so much to think about. I don't think I could make that business succeed because I've got so many overheads.
Yeah, it's another example, isn't it, of some unfair competition. I mean, charity shops and charity in general, they're great things, but the reason you just have so many of them does come down to these business rates. It's just one of the many things that's making it so hard to succeed as a bricks and mortar business.
What would you say is needed for the high street to make some sort of comeback?
I mean, for sure, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for it to, say, come back to the level that it once was. Because I think with so much happening online these days, it's probably impossible entirely to reverse that. But again, I would say councils could do a bit more to encourage small businesses and to help small businesses. Maybe they should think a little bit about the business rates and things like that. I mean, I think the thing is that it's not just about tax revenue or even jobs, which are both incredibly important. And the economy of the UK has not been doing particularly well now for many years. Both of those things are incredibly important, but it's also that it's kind of the fabric of a town, isn't it? The high street. So where they're disappearing, we're really sort of moving towards almost kind of ghost towns, really, aren't we? And in some areas, especially poorer areas, there's just very little left. And it just doesn't seem to be the right direction.
So I'll be honest, if I need to go and buy anything, like, for example, if I want to go buy tools in a local area, I go to my local DIY, my local DIY supplier, because she's a lovely lady who I've known for 20 years, and I know that will help her towards her business. But I know that that's my perspective. I want to help that person with their business, whereas I know others, like, they might want to help, but they also know that they can get something for a third of the price. Like, for example, they might go to Screwfix or they might go to B&Q. Even though they are a bigger brand, they're still getting what they want for cheaper. Like, do you think that we need to start encouraging people to start going to their local shops rather than going to the bigger chains? And if so, what would you say these local business owners need to do to compete?
I mean, certainly it would be a step in the right direction, wouldn't it? I think, though, it's very difficult these days, unfortunately, to ask anybody to spend more money than they need to, because all these things are interconnected. But it's actually, well, as we all know, it's a very difficult economy. People are struggling even where they're making savings all across the board. We've had very high inflation for several years. The whole economy was shut down during COVID. Certainly, though, I think you're right. I think I would certainly encourage people to spend at small businesses where they can. Small businesses, it's the heart of the nation, I suppose. It's so there's always been very large businesses, but in the UK, there's millions of small businesses. They employ millions of people, pay a large amount of tax revenue. Obviously, they should be appreciated. But
obviously, with the way that the government's going, we can't really, and more now either shutting down or selling up.
I mean, the new government hasn't helped either. It's been described as a tax bomb, but the national insurance changes in their manifesto, obviously, they said that they weren't going to increase employees' NI, and they've been quite clever with that because they've increased it for employers. But the cost in real terms is going to be £500 or £600 per person that each business employs minimum. And anything other than the very, very smallest businesses will be affected. And obviously that's going to come off people's pay packets as well. I don't see it being a policy that's going to help with growth, but it is what it is, I suppose.